patients will learn the same approach and will be able to modify the situation that's required. Now, what are the factors that you take into account when you want to choose an approach? You want to see whether how good is your visualization, very important, or the preserving any muscle or internal plane, what the extensive possibilities, and what the ease of component placement. Most already, of course, you know which approach has got a dislocation rate, what is the rate of anatomic classification. I go through each with respect to different approaches, and what is the incidence of limp in a particular approach, and what is the rate of how things the pain recovery and cost benefit. Now, a lot of confusion regarding approaches. Even when I hear talks in many forums, surgeons confuse between various approaches because of different terminologies and surgeons use words sort of interchangeably. Now, I think it's time to get away with all the confusion and we need to get on to the basics. So basically 4 types of approaches. The anterior approach and the variants are there. The anterolateral and the variants are there. Lateral and the variants, and the posterior approach and the variants. So should not confuse this. A lot of variants to the 4 approaches. Basically, in the plane interval, muscular plane interval, there are only 4 approaches. The first is the anterior approach. It's truly an internervous approach. And the problem is the patient has to be in the supine position with the plane between the sartorius and the TFL. A lot of people do a harding and say I went anteriorly. So basically, we divide approaches based on where you dislocate the hip anterior and posterior. The first 3 will be anterior because you dislocate the hip anteriorly, and only posterior. But harding is not an anterior approach. And nowadays, when you say an anterior approach, you're talking about a true anterior approach. The plane between the sartorius and the tensor fasciae lata. Nothing else is the anterior approach. You've got limited access. The danger of a varus is very common. There's 10% chance of lateral femoral radius nerve injury. That's a high incidence of lateral femoral injury. So if you're going to do this approach, certainly tell the patient that that is a very high percentage of femoral radius nerve injury. Special equipments are needed, but nowadays surgeons are managing to do this without special table. The acetabulum is really a joy to do, but the femur can be very challenging and error prone. Make a lot of mistakes when doing the femur. And gain tremendous popularity in the US. It's really the surgery that's picking up in the US. Tremendous growth in the US. And I think close to 15 to 20% of THRs in the US are done through the anterior approach. And yet to meet a surgeon in India who does this approach routinely. Then we go to the anterolateral approach based on the muscle plane that you. Now we are between the gluteus medius, posterior and the TFL line. This is the approach that we use for open reduction of a fracture neck of femur. You want to use this approach? You have a lateral incision which curves towards the ASIS. And this is being used by arthroplasty by many surgeons. A lot of surgeons in India also use this approach. It's got advantages and disadvantages. And then you go to direct lateral. Lateral is a hard approach. A lot of people are trained in the UK who tend to use the hard. The various approach like the Liverpool approach, Omega, etc. are all variants. Basically doing the same thing. We're taking a part of the real thing is we're taking a part of the gluteus medius off. Maybe 1/3, maybe half, maybe 40%. You may take the sliver of trochanter, or you may just on the fascia radius layer. But whatever it is, basically some part of the medius is taken off, and that's what defines the approach. Abductor damage is a potential problem. So when you want to do a high performance, if the patient wants to do lots of things post-op, may not be the best approach. But the dislocation is very low. So if you're an elderly patient, you're worried about dislocation, this may be an excellent approach. And there are other variants of this approach where you have a conjoined aponeurism, the gluteus medius and the vas lateralis can be taken as one sleeve, and there's again variations, but all of them are to be called as the direct lateral approaches or variants. Then we come to the post-lateral approach. This is what I use most of the time. It's easy, familiar, and simple. It's muscle sparing. If you want to high performance it, it's very conducive for that. It's internervous. It's extensile. That's what I like because many of our hips are complex primaries. We do a lot of things. And even if you want a division, you convert to ETO, you want to convert to GANS osteotomy or trochanteric osteotomy, it's very conducive. So this is what the approach that I use for our patients most of the time. The concerns are dislocation. There have been high rates of dislocation reported, but now a lot of recent papers saying that if you take the combined anteversion correctly, and we'll show you how we do that in OR today, and then we do a good capsular repair, the rate of dislocation is as low as any other type of lateral or anterior approach. So that's the consensus as of today, 2015. So what I want to emphasize in this talk today is that this is a post-lateral approach, which I'm sure the approach that most of you will be doing. The 3 key steps to master. So when you have a stiff hip, these are the 3 steps that when you have a hip which is very easy to expose, that's different. But many of our hips, or chronic pathologies, and we need to know this, and we try and show it on the diagram as well. So the 3 steps are the fan acetabular release, the Birmingham maneuver, which I will show you, and the positioning of the anterior retractor. I think these are crucial 3 steps. So what do you mean by the pan acetabular release? So when you do a partial acetabular release to the posterior approach, the head is now dislocated posteriorly. If you are able to keep the tibia vertical, that means you have released part of the capsule. So tibia vertical position means only part has been released. If you really have released a true global release, you really have done a pan acetabular or a 360-degree release of the capsule, you'll be able to lay the tibia flat on the table. That's a good 360-degree turn. That means you have released the capsule fully. So any pathology, orthotic hip, like the knee, it's got a contracted capsule. Capsule is the structure that is always, it's not the iliopsoas, it's not any extra structure, it's always the capsule. So capsular release 360 must be an essential part of all your arthroplasties. I find a lot of people saying, I don't release the anterior capsule because I think it will dislocate. You are wrong. Recently published paper which said that if you don't release the capsule, the dislocation rate should be higher. You must balance the hip. You must be releasing posteriorly, you must also release anterior. 360 degrees is absolutely essential for many orthotic hip that is stiff. So how to achieve this? We have an inferior capsular release. I'll show you the video. That's the first step. And once you do an inferior capsular release, you can bring the anterior capsule under vision. A lot of people are scared of releasing the anterior capsule because they're worried about the femoral nerve and the artery. But if you release the anterior capsule under vision, it's a very, very safe thing to do. And then the second thing that you must learn to do is how to take the proximal femur away from your acetabulum. So it will show you, it has got these steps where you accelerate the leg, and then you do an anterior translation. Then the second part is elevation, extension, and tucking in the proximal femur under the abductor. It will show you. And the anterior important point about this is that the anterior hormone that you are going to put is not on a wall. Many people are worried because the wall breaks off once or twice and they are worried. You never put the anterior hormone on the wall. You put over the anterior column, the region of the anterior inferior iliac spine. And that way you will never ever break the bone there and be able to translate the femur really, really anteriorly and get an excellent view of the acetabulum. I'll try and show you the diagram as well. So this is the brief thing about the posterior approach, a quick video, about a minute and a half. So you can see the bottom is the entire posterior, and that is the gluteus maximus tendon, which I usually release in all stiff hips. That's the capsule I'm developing. I'm putting a pin to hold the abductor, gluteus medius and minimus anteriorly, so that I don't disturb that. I'm now releasing all the short externals of the capsule, so that I can display the capsule from the 6 o'clock to the 12 o'clock position. So, and then I'm now incising the capsule. So I keep an acetabular flap and a femoral flap so I can suture it back when I close. A good posterior release. That's what I'm doing now. And this patient has got some osteophytes, so I'm taking out the osteophytes to enable dislocation. Most of our Ang-Spawn, today we're doing an Ang-Spawn, most likely we'll have this. I will also tell you during the live demo how to identify which is osteophyte, which is native bone. This is the osteophyte which I'm nibbling off. And now once any hip must be easy to dislocate like that. So we dislocated that. So now we're going to do the release, the inferior capsular release. You get a capsular scissors, you see that? And once you do the inferior capsular release, you'll be able to rotate the leg and the anterior capsule comes into view. And it's very safe to cut the anterior capsule under vision. That's the key thing. And now we're taking off the head. I usually cut only at the base of the head so that I can put my anterior hormones. It's got a nice calcar arch for display. The assistant pulls with a bone hook, and then I put this anterior hormone and I hammer this anterior hormone at the level of the anterior inferior iliac spine over the anterior column and not the anterior wall. You see that in a second. So that's the I'm hammering it, the anterior hormone, it goes over the anterior column. There's no risk of breaking the bone anteriorly. And this is the maneuver, and you find that the proximal femur subluxes anteriorly, and you get a 360-degree view. We put our other retractors in place now, and you'll find always you get a global view of the acetabulum. I think that's fundamental to get good component positioning. I think that's the base of any hip arthroplasty. You want, and then you find and you proceed with your steps of your reaming. So once you have a global view, your component positioning automatically improves. One of the reasons why junior surgeons get their component positioning wrong is because they have not exposed the hip adequately. And you can see you get a full exposure. There's a tan that I'm marking. Usually tan is the landmark for my component positioning. And you can see the entire, and now you can see the entire femur is done, and then we proceed with the implant. So and then once we finish, we do a capsular closure. And once the capsule is closed, the hip cannot be dislocated unless, so we do not give any post-op restrictions. Patients can do whatever they want post-op because You're confident of closing the capsule, and then you don't need to give any post-op restrictions. A word about minimally invasive surgery. It's good, bad, and ugly. So a lot of things going on. It went through a phase of popularity, and now it's declined in popularity. Dr. Berger from the US is the one who popularized this. Many news articles, etc., etc. And this was a JBJ's editorial by Dr. Ranawat, who said that minimally invasive surgery for total joint organs should not be used to benefit an individual surgeon, a manufacturing company, or a hospital. Unfortunately, minimally invasive surgery seems to have become a marketing tool for these groups. So more of a marketing tool than anything, has not been translated to show any actual benefit to the patient. So however, what is good has come out of MIS, some irrefutable facts. It's totally refined the surgical procedure of hip arthroplasty. Suddenly we are doing it better because we learned some tricks from the surgeons who do MIS. It led to the development of many innovative instrumentations. A lot of instruments I use, we have developed ourselves because we went through that phase, and now it's very helpful even in standard surgery. Phenomenal improvement, perioperative analgesia, absolutely. That has been a revolutionary change. The patients are ambulating much faster now, and early ambulation is indisputably a good goal to achieve. So what we now do is we certainly don't do MIS, but we always try and do the smallest incision possible. And we are not sticking to a particular length. For a particular patient, I like to do it in the smallest incision possible. That's a good concept to have. You want to extend it, you extend it. So always we use a skin marking pencil because it's not good to do MIS. And the equal tone not good to make a giant incision. That's also not good. So you want to make it as small as possible. You always measure incision size in the BMA of the patient and document it. If you start doing it, you'll find the incision getting smaller and smaller. That you know it gets smaller and smaller. A very important point is you must recognize the acetabular end and the femoral end of the incision. The femoral end of the incision is the top side of the incision. The acetabular side is the bottom incision. If you're struggling with the acetabular side, there's no point extending the incision proximally. You must extend the incision distally, and the reverse is true. So don't make unnecessary long incisions. Make it as short as possible, but don't do MIS surgery. So how do you deal with a patient who comes and says, I want MIS surgery? So this is a trick that I have. I do a lot of US women who are probably the toughest to deal in this category. I've done many, hundreds and hundreds of them. So if you ask me how long the incision will say, I'll say with that long. They're all very impressed. And when I finish, I can make it out my own. And I always take a photograph with my finger there, and they're all mighty impressed with my MIS. But my MIS keeps changing. So aim for early ambulation and discharge. Multimodal pain control is crucial, and as orthopedic surgeons must become a master of that. Ambulation on the day of surgery is good, at least on the next day. There's no excuse for you not ambulating an arthroplasty the next day after surgery. You're doing something wrong to the patient because all complications go up. So don't worry about the discharge time, but ambulation time is critical. The patient may discharge them 4th day, 6th day, that's fine. But don't tell me you're ambulating on the 3rd day. You're doing something wrong to the patient. You must ambulate at least on the day after surgery, if not on the day of surgery. If you can't achieve this, ask the anesthetist to change his techniques. If you're not ambulating the patient due to pain issues the next day, or the patient is vomiting, etc., etc., the anesthetist is doing something wrong. And in spite of that, if you told anesthetist still the same, then it's time to change your anesthetist. You have to do that. So, regarding the various approaches, various data, you can argue whichever way you want. As I told you, the posterior, the reported rates are 7, but if you do a good capsular closure, it comes to less than 1%. Dislocations have always been a thing, but if you again close the capsule, there's no issue with any approach. Endotopic ossification, what has been, if you look at the literature, there's no relation to the actual approach. It's more a question of how you do the surgery. So you avoid bone dust, hematoma, muscle damage, then you find that the rate of HO is exactly the same, whatever approach you use. So trauma to the soft tissue during surgical approach is more important than the closure approach. Does approach really matter? The real answer is not really. Each approach has advantages and disadvantages. What is important is familiarity, extensile possible case, attention to anatomical details for exposure and closure, and prevent bone dust, muscle damage, etc., prevent HO. So thank you for your attention.
Dr. Vijay will be leaving for the live surgery demonstration. And you can ask a lot of questions during surgery also. That will be the right time. For a specific steps, you can ask him questions.
Dr. IPS over there, please come on this stage for the next slide.
Dr. Oberoi is again from Delhi. He was in railways, left his job because, and now he is in, what was his name? The prime Artemis in Gurgaon. He is a consultant doing both hips and knees. He is holding a big event now. Maybe we will talk about it. Again, the friendship is more than 12 years. And we know each other, we keep on meeting, we share a lot of things, we shared a lot of things yesterday night also. So welcome, and again, I'm pretty sure you will be enlightened.
I'm going to speak about pre-operative planning of a total hip replacement. Just give me a moment. This is broke down or what? Can I have a laser pointer, please? A laser pointer. Laser pointer. Sure. Okay, friends. Whenever you see an X-ray of a hip and try to plan an arthroplasty in a total hip replacement, I think there are certain things and steps which you should do to pre-operatively plan where exactly you want to put your acetabulum and where exactly you want to put a femur. Preoperative planning makes your life easy and you can reproduce all of these steps during surgery. So I think it's important whenever you see a radiograph to identify where the center of hip rotation is going to fall. Because hip is a dynamic joint, and unless and until you identify a center of rotation where you have to bring your hip back, it's critically important. Now look into this X-ray, and this is an arthritic hip. Where exactly are you going to place your acetabulum socket? Is the acetabulum socket going to be placed here, or the center of hip rotation here or here? It's a big question mark. And such kind of deformed hips normal come to our practice. Now I'm just going to show you a couple of slides and simple steps how to make certain lines on an X-ray and identify where your acetabulum is going to fall. And you can reproduce all of these steps in theatre to put your acetabulum in right position. So whenever you see an X-ray of a deformed hip, understand that hip is arthritic and pelvis is tilted. And when pelvis is tilted, you have to draw certain lines which are standard lines which will help you in identifying the hip rotation. So first line which you are going to join is basically to join both the ischial tuberosities. So that's the line, is the first line. Whenever you see any X-ray, however deformed it may be, just join a line between two ischial tuberosities. That's line number one. The second line which you are going to join is join both the iliac crest. So even if the pelvis is deformed and tilted, if you draw these two lines, you actually make a big frame of your pelvis. So two lines, one joining ischial tuberosities, second line joining the iliac crest. The third line which you are going to join is joined between these two lines. So that's a line which is joining the ischial tuberosity line and iliac spine line. It's a straight line like this. When you draw this straight line, calculate how long this line is. So if I say this line is 100 millimeters, so just write with a piece of, with a pen, that this distance is 100 millimeters. Now what you need to draw, next line is a Kohler's line. So if you see the ischium and go down, so that's the line which you are going to join the next one. Now understand, in a deformed hip, your acetabulum should sit right at the teardrop. And in a deformed hip, it is sometimes very difficult to identify where the teardrop is. Teardrop essentially is a cross section of two lines. So one line is a Kohler's line, which is like this. The second line is a Shenton's line. You know Shenton's line in a neck femur fracture. So second line is a Shenton line. So wherever the Kohler's line and Shenton line meets, that's the teardrop. So that's exactly the place where acetabulum base should be seated. Now you, after drawing these lines, the Shenton line and the Kohler line, draw that point where these two lines are meeting. From that line, extend 1/5 up. So suppose I told you you have already drawn 100 millimeters. Now from that teardrop, you actually go 1/5 up, which is 20 millimeters up. Then go 1/5 on the side like this. That's another 20 millimeters. And then join both of these lines like this. And the center of this would be the center of your vestibule. So I'll just repeat all of these steps again for those who probably missed on the steps. So first is ischial tuberosity line, that's line 1. Second line is a line joining the iliac crest, that's line 2. The third line is a line which is going to join between these two lines, that's a perpendicular line, which is line 3. Once you have drawn these 3 lines, this third line you have to calculate and write. Okay? Then you have to draw 2 lines. One is a Kohler's line, and it's easy to identify a Kohler's line, and a Shenton's line. When you have drawn Kohler's and the Shenton, intersection of Kohler's and Shenton lines give you the teardrop. From the teardrop, you go 1/5 up of the distance which you actually calculated. From the teardrop, you go 1/5 up, so 20 millimeters, and then perpendicular 1/5, again 20 millimeters, and then join both of these lines. And the center of this would be exactly where cup center should fit. So however deformed your pelvis may be, however dysplastic your pelvis may be, if you identify the teardrop and the distances, you can actually see where you have to bring your hip center down. So if there is dysplasia, you have to bring your hip center down. If it is protrusion, you have to bring your hip center up. So this is how you actually draw the lines to identify your hip center and the center, and then you take a template which a company usually gives and see that this, and just color this area and see that your acetabulum exactly sitting into this colored area. So you actually define the size of your acetabulum, you define exactly where you have to bring down the acetabulum during reaming also and bring it down. So that's how you put your acetabulum socket in place. And the inclination is something which you always keep at 45 degrees. So with this socket here, you actually put your inclination at 45 degrees, and then that's how your vestibular templating is done. Is there any question in vestibular templating?
Is there any embargo for magnification so far as the X-ray is concerned?
No, absolutely no, because magnification index is exactly same which has been incorporated in the there are issues with the digital X-rays now. Don't put it any magnification. The radiological image which you get is typically incorporated into the same source. Our aim is basically to identify the hip center of rotation, and this is how you do it.
That this can be done in digital X-ray also, which are out of proportion to the size.
Yes, you can do it in digital X-ray, because in a digital X-ray, as you keep on increasing, the distances don't differ. If you take a CD and put it on your system, it may enlarge the image, but if you take the distances, they always remain the same. So that's how, if this is increasing, the scale also increases. So if you have calculated 40 and then zoom it up, it remains 40. It's just that the visual impression it increases, but it remains same. Any more questions in identifying the hip center of rotation in a deformed? What we have requested Dr. Prasad is he will be giving us a deformed X-ray also. During lunch or a tea break, if anybody wants to understand, we can draw these lines and show you even in a deformed X-ray how exactly to bring your hip center down and where to draw these lines and see that hip is sitting well. So that's how you do it. You have to actually identify the teardrop and the lateral wall, and your acetabulum exactly is going to sit. So from the base, you have to calculate where you have to put your acetabulum line. So even in a deformed hip which is like this, you now understand how down, inferior and middle you have to bring your hip center, and you can actually reproduce it during your surgery. Okay. The second part of my talk is the femoral side. So you have done the acetabulum side, and you understand now where exactly you have to bring your acetabulum. And I'm just going to show how we do it on the femur side.
So one question, sir.
Yeah.
So the X-ray which you have shown just right now, the Shenton line
No, I think the center line is much above the.
What is center line basically? You go from the inferior part of the pubic ramus.
In this particular
It may be broken. It may be broken. If it is a neck femur, it may be
Can you
broken.
please go back to that?
Yes.
So not this one, sir. The one that this other actually.
The polar line.
No, sir. One this class just you showed.
This is the same one.
Please explain how to center and outward.
That is
Just,
why
just for the total hip you had done that X-ray. The one before that the total hip you had done.
Mouse
mouse, there is no mouse also. You want to see the polar line?
No, sir. One more X-ray was there in which you have done total hip and you have shown the X-ray also.
The last X-ray. The surgery has been done.
Next slide. Next slide.
Yes, in this case, how will you draw this center line?
In an X-ray.
You see this X-ray,
Just a
we are
image.
calculating.
Sorry. This one.
Yes, sir.
इंटरसेक्शन तो चाहिए उसका
So, no, in the other X-ray.
The radiograph. Leo.
Yeah, it is difficult to draw that simple line.
No. Okay. I am using. This is the ilioischial. Can you see this one?
Yes.
My mouse is going down. Here. And when you extend this line up, this is where the teardrop is going to come. Because hip is dysplastic, this has gone up. So inferiorly as you move, this is roughly where you are going to teardrop is going to fall. Okay? And this is what you exactly try and reproduce in the surgery also. So that's the ilioischial which is coming up. That's the inferior part of the pubic ramus which is going towards the neck of the femur, where the center line is broken whenever neck femur happens. And that's where the teardrop, these two lines are going to meet somewhere here. So that's where the teardrop is going to come. And now I'll just show you some slides about the femoral preparation. So now how do you do the femoral preparation? First step in a femur is to evaluate a limb length discrepancy. Most of these patients have shorter leg and you have to evaluate limb length discrepancy. So how do you evaluate a limb length discrepancy on an X-ray? Draw a line which connects both the teardrops. You have already defined teardrops by drawing Shenton lines and a Kohler's line and point where the teardrop is being formed. Join line on both the sides which join the teardrop, number one. Then join both the tuberosities also. Okay? That's the second line which you have already drawn. And see where the lesser trochanter upper border is formed. So you have to calculate the distance either between the lesser tuberosity, the upper border, and the tuberosity lines like this, or a distance between the lesser trochanter and the line which was joining the teardrop. If the pelvis has gone up, if the hip has gone up, one of these distance will either decrease or increase. So you note this is the anatomical limb length discrepancy which is there. You have to identify the fixed points like teardrop and ischial spine, and the femoral point which is the lesser tuberosity, the lesser trochanter, upper part, and this is how limb length discrepancy, a true limb length discrepancy is calculated. Now patients often have pelvic obliquities and they have an an apparent limb line discrepancy, and that is usually